Broadcasting from the business capital of the world, this is the Podcast Business News Network.
This guy is somebody who is a noted architect in the New York City area, works on all different types of projects from residential to commercial, cutting edge design, been doing it literally for decades. And we're going to get a architectural update and also talk about a trip that he made overseas and the differences in terms of architecture and the procedure. Mr. John Riggio is back with us. Hey, John, how you doing?
Good. Hi, Steve. How are you?
I'm well. It's good to get you back on here. I know sometimes we talk about your tennis career back in the day, but you're also known for architecture in the New York City area. Trip to China you took at one point. You went over there.
Yes.
What was that trip all about?
Yeah, I've been to China a couple times. And I think one interesting about this trip is because I was visiting my in-laws. My wife's family is living up in China.
Oh, okay.
And she had come from an area all the way in the northwest area called Karamai. And it's really a territory of China. But one interesting thing about the trip is that when I went to China, they told me I'm allowed to talk about any architectural things. And there were a lot of interesting things when I visited there. Just as far as visiting there, I think as far as if you were just an everyday person, there was a few interesting things that I discovered there, and they were telling me about all kinds of different things about architect work. And in that particular city where she lived and her family is that was city planned in a cooperation between China and some other countries, they told me, in the Middle East. And so the design of the city is very interesting, and it's somewhat newly built over. And so when I went there was some interesting things. I mean, one interesting thing that I saw there compared to just living here in the U.S. is they had this toilet that's on the floor. I think people that come from different parts of the world, they might have seen these toilets, but this is a toilet that I haven't really seen before. But it was very interesting because the only toilet I've seen like that was like when I was on vacation to like Pompeii. They had this ancient toilet that they showed was on the floor. And this toilet, what I thought was really amazing, that it's the same kind of toilet, but it was made of stainless steel and it can flush. And it turns out, I think years later here, some people are interested to even install that kind of toilet in their houses here in the U.S.
Tell me, I'm trying to get a visual.
They like that toilet. They're interested in using it here.
Describe it. I'm trying to get
It's a good toilet. It works the same as like any toilet, just on the floor instead. It's very interesting.
All right, let's get detailed here. Is it something you sit on?
It isn't. You just stand up. I thought it was very interesting type of thing there.
Wow.
I think because here in the U.S. they don't have any kind of toilets like that. But yeah, that was it's a common thing there. It isn't a big deal. It was just one little item I picked up.
Yeah.
One interesting item when I was there in China was some basic things I think that you don't see on TV. But I think when I was there, just like looking around, and they pointed out to me that they have a lot of single-family detached houses. Neighborhoods just look like in the U.S. And I think a lot of the buildings are also low-rises. They have a lot of low-rise. I think the newer buildings, they have those high-rise apartment buildings.
Mm-hmm.
I think that is like a newer construction they have. But I think most of the areas in the city, they weren't the high-rise apartments. I think you see on television, usually they are showing the high-rise apartment buildings. But I think most of the area in the city, they're usually low-rises. And they even have those regular detached neighborhoods like they have here in the U.S., regular suburban detached neighborhoods. They look exactly the same, which is another very interesting point there.
Huh.
And I think talking to them in China, there's always a possibility of maybe I'd be interested in maybe going there and maybe getting some jobs there, designing any kind of architectural work they have available. But I think one interesting thing there uh was really getting a stamp. I mean, it's like it's as complex as like getting a stamp here in the USA. You would have to have show all your education. It would have to be compatible with China. They'd have to then you'd have to have experience, and they'd have to give you your stamp at some point. I
Wow.
think most people, what they do is they get into this thing of going to China, making their design, and then having uh, a local architect in China stamp their drawings.
I want to make sure
It
I
isn't
understand.
illegal. It isn't.
Is so here in the States, when you want to get, we call it a stamp, but it's the approval. Is it in the United States where you have to prove your education and all of that, or is that in Japan, China, where you have to do that?
If you wanted to build say a house in China, you would have to go there, and there's two ways to do it. One is to just find an architect that's locally there, and
Huh?
the other thing is to become an architect in China. But I think to become an architect in China is much more involved. If you were going to go there for one project and stamp, it was very difficult. You would have to spend years there. Your education might not be compatible, and of
Wow.
course, you'd have to have really be excellent speaking and writing the language too. So a
Would
lot of
you,
people,
based on all of that, John, would you say that it's much harder to get a license as an architect in China as it is in the United States?
I don't know if that is really any different. From what I've been told about the education requirements, I think it is very similar. It isn't really that different. Same idea.
Okay.
You go to college, get your experience, take your tests. It isn't really that different than in the USA. But if you're here in the US and then you go to China that you want to work on one job overseas, most people they would get someone that is local there that could stamp it. But I think they had a big problem with it being a scam is that you can I think there's all kinds of things you get yourself in big trouble there too. I heard you can get yourself in big trouble where if you pay someone to do the stamping and you don't get your business papers right, they could think you're making a bribe. It's so there could
Hmm.
be all kinds of problems.
When
And
I think of the buildings there, I think of, they have a very large population, especially in the cities, small areas. And it seems to me that they design to maximize their space. Even if you go to a hotel, you don't have a lot of space. It's like it's crammed in there. Did you notice that? And is that even more challenging when you have to design in that way, where you have to be very space efficient in your design?
there is a lot of things about space fish I can talk about in 2 seconds. But one thing about of getting the whole thing like you're having someone stamp your drawings there, I think initially is very similar to like any type of business venture someone would get involved with in the US. Like say you want to just do any kind of business and you just go into the business, but you have no technical knowledge, no knowledge of licenses, permits, any kind of things like that, insurance.
Mm.
And it can become a big problem. And the same idea can exist when you go to China if you want to work as an architect on a project and you have no idea about all those different complex things. And if you don't find out about them, it can become a
Wow.
big debacle, big problem for yourself. You can get in trouble. That's so that is one thing about it that they will also explain to me about doing something like that is like you're taking your chances. It's like any business. Like say if you want to go into any business, but you have no idea of all the different requirements, permits, licenses, you can get into a big problem for yourself. Same idea with doing work in China. Really, any country is the same idea. So
Mm.
I think I've been receiving some things in the email about them having things about getting your architect license in other countries. Some other countries have a relationship with the U.S. where you can get a license very easily. They have like it's like an agreement between the U.S. and a few countries that are allowing things like that. Now, as far as like the detail with spaces and things like that, I think as far as China, I think it's like anything. If you have a smaller space to live, you might try to compact things
Hmm.
and things like that. I think one interesting thing as far as architectural is there was a very interesting thing again with the bathroom area. One was that they were able to tile the whole room and make like the whole room like one big shower, and you put your washer dryer in there, you drain out into the floor drain, which is a very interesting idea. It makes it more like a multi-use space.
Huh.
I think I do some things like that in the U.S. design here with the new design of people's washrooms. We have like a washroom on the second floor. It might have a doors to the balcony, stair that goes to the attic. There are designs like that where you're taking that space and you're using it for multi-uses, getting the most out of that extra square footage.
Okay.
That is,
Huh.
but they have that situation in China like that. That was another thing I noticed.
Can we look at that for a second? What you just said in terms of the design. So now you have a bathroom that has a balcony and access to the attic coming from the bathroom. Am I hearing that right?
Yes, that's on the second floor. A lot of people are really going for the idea of putting their laundry washroom on the second floor. So because everyone over the years, usually people were putting their washroom in a single family detached house. They're putting them in the basements, but they don't want that idea that much anymore over the years because a lot of times the basements they get filled up with humidity, and there's probably over the years you get a few floods that took place. So the washroom is much more convenient on the second floor where you can just bring the
Yep.
clothes right to your washroom there. And I think with that extra space, it usually works out with the design where you can take that space, you can use it more like a common space where you can walk out to like a balcony area or a terrace.
Sure.
And sometimes I even take that space that widen it a little and I have a stair going up to the attic. So they could use that attic as a storage area, potentially a
Hmm.
half story.
I just want to caution one thing. The first place I ever bought was a townhouse a bunch of years ago. It was brand new. And I remember leaving for work one day. I had a later shift, and I'll never forget this. It's about 11:45, and I'm walking through the living room, and there's a waterfall coming out of a light in the ceiling. And I'm like, what? And I ran upstairs, shut off the washer. The washer overflowed, created all the water. Why? Because there was no drain in the floor. And it never even occurred to me. I just assumed that, when they designed it, they knew what they were doing. But picture that, no drain. So something overflows and you're on the second floor. So the only remedy at this point was, aside from fixing all the sheetrock and all the issues from the water damage, was I made a stainless sheet metal pan with like a 6-inch lip around it and a water alarm. And I could only use the washing machine when I was home, just in case it would overflow for whatever reason. So yeah, if you're going to do it upstairs, take it from me. Make sure you have a drain. You definitely need a drain in the floor.
Yes, put a floor drain in there. Yes.
I don't know how they designed it without that. Like at one point, it's going to happen. And in fact, my friend just had it happen last week with a washing machine that was in the garage. So it was fine, but it had a leak, and it was one of the hoses underneath the washer. It just rotted after a period of time. It was a $10 fix. If that was someplace else in the house, would have been a big problem in terms of water. Obviously, garage floor, it's porous. It just dissipated and went away. How about some other thoughts on bathrooms in terms of design, tips, ideas, anything, even trends that people are asking for nowadays?
Yeah, there's been a lot of times trends in bathrooms. I think going back years ago when I first started, everyone wanted a nice whirlpool. They wanted these like jacuzzi whirlpool,
Yes, yes.
custom size whirlpool. And that was going on for a long time. Those different kinds of whirlpools. Some of them were like you build a wood with tile on top, and then they would take the pre-made tub and just like put it in the base you make. There are all kinds of different kinds of things like that over the years.
Yep.
I think most recently, a lot of people are going for like a design that is like a revival of an old-fashioned bathroom tub. It's a freestanding tub that has
Okay.
like four stands, four legs on the bottom. It rests on the tile floor and it's freestanding. And this is a new type of freestanding tub. It's sort of like a revival of an old idea people had years ago. And some of them don't have a feet on the bottom. They have like just like a more like an oval base that sits on the tile floor. And it's the same idea. It's a freestanding unit. You don't have to put it against the tile wall or build it in this one. It's very similar looking to the
Hmm.
original idea they used to have years ago, just a freestanding tub. So that is a number of projects I've been doing over the last few years have been these freestanding tubs. I've increased slightly. A lot of people are getting into this idea of having a freestanding tub in their bathroom. That's just like one of the ideas. So I like a lot of times over the years, whenever I'm designing these bathrooms, it's usually trying to get a nice custom, like master bathroom, usually supposed to really have a lot of nice things in it like that. And all those little factors have changed over the years, putting skylights in the bathrooms, things like that.
Ah, okay.
And I think the flooring surfaces, they are pretty much ceramic tile over the years. The different kinds of tiles and styles have changed. I think I've shown some of them on the show here. It depends on what kind of style tiles you like and things like that. And but yeah, the bathroom designs, they have changed slightly with trends over the years. There are all kinds of different trends they have. And so that's what's been going on with design and those type of things in the bathrooms.
So I have to imagine in the bathroom with a freestanding tub, and I do have this visual of an older tub, an older fashioned looking tub, right? Um, A, you have to have a lot of space, and B, you have to be prepared for no privacy, even if you have a lot of space, because there's nothing going to block your view. Same thing with, I guess, the toilet in that type of bathroom, right?
Yes, yeah. For some reason, people just like this idea. It's a
Hmm.
revival idea from years ago. This freestanding tub, and this
Sure.
it works okay as far as the plan goes. It doesn't seem to bother the plan. You don't have to stick it in the corner anymore. They could center it, and you don't need to have any like small wall build-outs or anything. So it's easy just to have it stay there. And that is a style that has been coming back. I've had it on a number of jobs recently.
I will say this in one of the houses, my second to last house, it had a already there was there when I got there, a call it a whirlpool jacuzzi. And I gotta tell you, I used it maybe 3 times out of, I don't know, 12 years. I don't know. Do people really use them that? It sounds great, it looks great, but I just never really use it. Never had the time. My kids used it every once in a while. And that brings to another challenge. Whenever I would try to fill it up, because it's a larger volume of water than maybe even a regular tub, I could never get the amount of hot water in that tub. And I even had a newer hot water heater. It was on demand. I don't know if you probably do those all the time in houses where it's just a box that's on the wall. And when you're calling for hot water, it heats it immediately. But eventually it couldn't keep up with the volume. So I think that's maybe another thing to be mindful of. I'm not the expert, but make sure that you can keep up with the amount of hot water that you want to put in a larger tub like that, because my system wouldn't do it. And that was a new system that I had.
Yes, and you're talking about the system that heats the water.
Yeah, the on demand. So it basically takes the place of a hot water heater, much more efficient. But maybe I needed a larger one. I had, substantial size one, but to keep up with the amount of water going in that tub, after a while, it just couldn't supply enough hot water. And then cold water would be coming out and kind of ruins the whole effect of having the jacuzzi in your
Yes, I
bathroom.
mean those units. A lot of people are using them as like the newest technology. I think the only thing about them is they have the option to add on like a small water tank for that reason. You can add on a little small water tank to it,
Yeah.
and then I think the other one is if it isn't gas fired, I just noticed from experience it's better to put it on an inside wall because what can happen is there's nothing keeping the unit warm. So in the event there's no one in the house, the heat's off, and you're not using any water, your pipes could freeze. So that's the only drawback to that kind of unit.
So I had it in the call it the burner room and downstairs with the washer and dryer. There was a tank attached to it, not that big, almost looked like your typical propane tank for your barbecue. I think they call it an expansion tank. I don't know. I can't see that. What does that do?
It does help a little. A lot of people like to add it on, and I think they don't have any problems with it. Because of that reason you're talking about it, that little delay in the water coming through warm, putting the small tank onto that direct vent unit seems to work slightly better.
Didn't work in my house. That was a long time ago. And maybe it wasn't designed right, or maybe it couldn't keep up with the demand for that, for that whirlpool. Any other thoughts on bathrooms while we were talking about the bathroom in China? Any thoughts of things that people are asking for, or trends, what people want nowadays in their bathrooms?
No, not really. I think that's about it.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
I mean, one interesting thing about China, with the same story, was when I was there, they were already telling me about this whole thing with SARS that they have there, which is very interesting, and the whole thing with keeping supplies in their home. And I think the thing with this 3 month they have a 3 month shutdown like every 3 years on average. And so everyone is required to keep 3 months worth of supplies of toilet paper, paper towels, any other kind of supplies you might need, with food supplies, things like that. And so that was something new. I did not know about that whole thing back then. I had gone there it was before 2019. It was a few years before 2019, and they had told me about this whole thing that happens there in China. Before, I did not know anything about it, and it was very interesting. And the whole thing, I think back then, I think people who was wearing a mask was just the opposite. Those were people who might have had like a little SARS event taking place, and if there are too many of them, then they'd have to go through like a lockdown, like what started to happen here. So that was very interesting. And so they have a whole thing with like putting storage under their staircase. This is something new I was noticing on the internet. This whole thing of putting pull-out organizers under people's staircases, and they already had this in China. And the reason why they could stock up on all kinds of paper items, food items, in the event they have a lockdown, because they told me if they have a lockdown, you're not allowed to go outside at all.
I want to make sure I have this clear. So this is in the event of a lockdown, whatever the situation may be, you're advised to keep a 3 month supply of staples, essential things, toilet paper products, things like that in your home. This is like standard procedure for many people in China.
Yes, correct.
Wow.
This was already a standard. There was something new I know about. They called it SARS back then. And they already had all those different things. So they have, to make sure they always have their washer dryer there. They have all their supplies in the house. So in case this lockdown takes place there, you can stay in your residence for as long as 3 months. You don't have to go outside at all. They might not be able to go out, depending on how bad. This was already going on for a long time, they told me. But I noticed the whole thing with the storage under the stairs. And I thought that was pretty interesting how they had this whole thing with storing extra supplies under there. You get like the big bag of like hand towels and everything, and all kinds of supplies like that, and you put it in there. And that is,
oh my gosh,
it was already happening. Yeah, they told me about that. That was very interesting that was happening, because I think something like that really didn't take place here in the U.S. So I think that was a very interesting of events they were telling me. And they said that usually every 3 years they have these shutdowns in China. So they were already used to this. And
this is before COVID. This is well before COVID. They're doing this.
Yes.
Interesting. Wow.
I think the this type of a problem, it is really very similar. They called it SARS back then. This is very similar. I think the COVID-19 was an offshoot of the SARS. That's what was happening.
Right. Wow. Interesting. That they were already on point, but then again, also you go anywhere way before COVID, people from China, even Japan, always wore masks. And we would look at them back then before we knew there was any, issues with COVID, like, what are they wearing masks for? Because they were ahead of the curve. They, out of respect, we don't want to spread any germs. And that's what they normally did. And then it became the norm. Wow.
It was reversed. Usually someone who had some kind of cold like that would usually wear a mask.
Right.
I think if it got bad enough, then the same thing would happen where everyone have to stay in and everyone would have to wear a mask, also things like that.
Interesting look at the culture there, even connected
I think one thing here compared to that is that when I was living, particularly in Long Island and New York City, we always had so many viruses because the population is very dense inside the New York City. I think over here, over the border in New Jersey, slightly further away from as dense a population, even though you just like take 45 minutes and I'm in the middle of the city. But I noticed from those years that viruses could spread very fast. Like you can get a flu or any kind of things like they had West Nile virus. They had all kinds of other viruses that were going around. And I think back then I used to use the antibacterial
hand sanitizer.
Yes, I used to use a hand sanitizer back then because I realized when I was going to people, either it was in their house for residential work, going to their business.
Sure.
There's a lot of people around, and there was a lot of people might have had these type of colds, these type of viruses going around, and I started to use that sanitizer back then. It was working good.
Wow.
I think I didn't get into wearing like the face mask. I think as far as there's also the only other thing as far as like in architect work is when you visit people's mechanical rooms and things like that, there is this whole thing about having a problem getting other diseases like asbestos related diseases and black mold related diseases and things like that, where if you maybe wearing a filter mask would work good. If you're on a job site where there's a lot of like dust going around from plaster and things like that, you could wear a mask on that too. You could have a problem getting too much of that in your lungs.
Yeah, especially like even asbestos. We're out of time here, John. Fascinating, looking at other countries and architecture. I want to tell everybody your website is your name, John, JOHN, RIGGIO.com. You can see a lot of John's work. And if you want to contact him, even as a consult, got a question, he's the guy over here. Always great talking with you, John. Thank you very much for being here. Maybe next time we'll pivot back to talking about your tennis career.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Are you looking for even more of the podcasts and hosts that you love? The Podcast Business News Network is proud to announce that you now have even more ways to listen live. Check out the MyTuner Radio, online radio box, and Simple Radio apps on iOS and Android, or find us online. Search for Business News Network on mytuner-radio.com, or search Podcast Business News Network on streama.com and onlineradiobox.com/US. Take your podcast on the go and don't miss a minute of the action.
Broadcasting from the business capital of the world, this is the Podcast Business News Network.
For nearly 2,000 severely injured veterans, everyday life has become filled with barriers.
Day-to-day simple tasks can become pretty daunting.
I have to carry my chair up 2 flights of steps or have somebody do it for me.
What scares me the most is just the falling.
When I'm struggling with my house, I think, to have that one great barrier just knocked down, it's crucial.
Home for Our Troops is a wonderful nonprofit that builds a
mortgage-free, fully adaptive, handicap-accessible house.
And there's no catch.
It'll be our very first home that we've ever owned.
This is a game changer.
This is where your life begins again.
We need you to join us in completing this important mission. Please visit hfotusa.org and help build homes and rebuild lives.
Because of you, everything's going to be okay.